Okay. Well, I hope everyone enjoyed their lunch and is prepared now for the second half of our program. For any of the panelists who are going to be on panel 3, if you could just grab a seat on the sides, we'll have you fill in the dates a little bit later. Right now, it is my distinct pleasure to invite my friend and colleague, Zafar, the U.S. Special Representative to Muslim Communities, to the podium for this afternoon's Ignite talk. Sharik, the floor is yours.
The famous Muslim philosopher Ibn Rushd, also known in the West as Averroes, he wrote that ignorance leads to fear, fear leads to hate, hate leads to violence. That's the equation. Ignorance leads to fear, fear leads to hate, hate leads to violence. Now, on September 11th, 2011, just a few blocks from here, we saw an extreme manifestation of that hate. Terrorists murdered more than 2,600 American citizens, more than 372 foreign nationals from countries around the world, including the countries represented here today. And we, of course, know that terrorists have killed individuals, families around the world, and overwhelmingly kill more Muslims than anybody else. Now, after 9/11, there was a spike, an uptick in hate crimes against people who were Arab or Muslim or South Asian or perceived to be. Now, I say perceived to be because that's important to keep in mind. Back a few years after 9/11, I used to work at the Department of Justice, and I was the special counsel for post-9/11 national origin discrimination. So my job was to investigate hate crimes against people who look like me, who look like some of you. Now, sometimes the victims were Arab or Muslim. Sometimes they were Hispanic, right? And it's important to know that the first victim of a post-9/11 backlash crime was Babur Singh Sodhi, a member of the Sikh faith. So again, ignorance combined with fear and hatred and bigotry is a dangerous combination. So where are we now? According to the FBI, which keeps uniform crime reports for the United States government, anti-Muslim hate crimes have spiked 67% in 2015, to the highest level since 9/11. Now, to put that in context, that's still half as much as anti-Semitic hate crimes, which are over 600. Right? Now, a couple things to keep in mind. First of all, these numbers don't include unreported cases. So oftentimes you'll have recent immigrants, people who have bad experiences with law enforcement in their home countries, their countries of origin. And they come from a tradition where you don't report crimes. And if they're, depending on their immigration status, maybe they don't want to rock the boat, they don't report. Well, we can't investigate what's not reported. The other point to keep in mind is oftentimes there'll be awful conduct. A woman in a hijab getting shouted at in the street. Or, as a father, something that's, very close to home, kids getting bullied at school. They don't rise to the level of a federal hate crime, but they're still hateful conduct. Right? But these uniform crime reports, they give us a trend that things are not going well. And let me tell you, this is just a U.S. perspective. Globally, anti-Semitism, anti-Muslim bigotry are growing across the world. Right? So what do we do as an international community? What do we do? Well, we have to do a lot, and there's a role for governments, there's a role for civil society, and I submit there's a role for the private sector. Now, with respect to government, we need leadership from our senior officials. 6 days after 9/11, President Bush went to a mosque in Washington, D.C., and he made it clear that Muslims are part of America. And he said, for those people who feel like they can intimidate our fellow citizens to take out their anger, they don't represent America, they represent the worst of humankind, and they should be ashamed of that behavior. Now, I'm very proud to say, as a member of the Obama administration, that this leadership continued in this administration. President Obama, since taking office, has consistently pointed to the fact that Muslims are part of the American fabric. They're the part of the fabric of America. He's been saying that over and over again. I was at that mosque in Baltimore when I heard my president reach out to young people. And again, as a father, this hit close to home. He'd reach out to young American Muslims and said, for those of you who are wondering if you fit in, where you fit in, let me tell you, you fit in right here. You're not Muslim or American, you're Muslim and American. And I know I join all of you with the hope and the expectation that our governments, including newly elected leaders in my country and your countries, continue this tradition of respect and tolerance. And it's my hope and my expectation that this trend continues. Now look, words matter. Yeah, words matter. But beyond words, we need action. Right? Governments have a role in investigating and prosecuting hate crimes and other acts of illegal discrimination. Now, in my country, the U.S. Department of Justice has aggressively prosecuted hate crimes since 9/11. They've opened up 75 investigations, 66 convictions. Now, the other important point is that we work very closely, the federal government works very closely with state and local law enforcement, where the majority of this activity occurs. And they've prosecuted cases where victims have been bullied at school, mosques have been burned. Women have not been allowed to, wear the religious head coverings in their places of worship, in places of employment. Now, look, government has a role to play, right? There's a leadership component, and certainly there's a prosecution component. But as we heard this morning, civil society has an important role. Now, the most obvious example of this is advocacy. Leveraging the judicial process, the legislative process, to hold governments accountable, to advocate in support of fundamental rights and liberties. Right? But beyond advocacy, I submit there's also tremendous value in coalitions. Yesterday we celebrated in the United States the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr. And there's no question that Martin Luther King Jr. and Rosa Parks and other African Americans were the leaders of our civil rights movement. There's no question. But one story that we forget is that the story of the American civil rights movement is a story of the importance of coalitions. You had African Americans, whites, Hispanics, Jews, Muslims, all working together, fighting for freedom, fighting for equality, a fight, I would say, that continues. Right? That's why I was so pleased to hear, maybe some of you know, about this new nascent coalition, the Muslim Jewish Advisory Council. Now, this is something that's long overdue. And these organizations, the Islamic Society of North America and the American Jewish Committee, are teaming up to fight the twin scourges of anti-Muslim bigotry and anti-Semitism. And let me tell you, anti-Muslim bigotry doesn't only affect Muslims. And anti-Semitism is not only a Jewish problem. And it's important that these types of coalitions, take place. But you know what? They're nascent. They're new, and they need support. Right? For these coalitions to really get to where they need to be, they need support, they need funding, they need training, they need capacity building. So there's a role. When we're talking about the role for civil society, there's a role of foundations to fund programming. There's a role for the media sector, the advocacy sector, to help these coalitions get off the ground. Right? It's great, but we can't all just applaud and say, okay, great, we've got a coalition. These things need to build. Right? I'm reminded, in my role as special representative to Muslim communities, I recently took a delegation of American civil society leaders, civil rights leaders, to Europe. And we did training workshops on community organizing, rights, advocacy in Europe, in Paris, in Marseille, in Antwerp, and Marseille. And it wasn't just Muslims, by the way. We had Jews, we had Roma, we had members of the LGBT community, the African immigrant community, and Muslims all together. And what was interesting is when we had a room like this, and everyone was together, and people, and one common theme we heard throughout these workshops, people would say, well, look, we're all working on these same issues of bigotry, of racism, of hatred, and we don't know each other. We've never met before. Ladies and gentlemen, that has to change. Civil society, we have to harness the power of coalitions if we're going to get to where we need to be. Now look, civil society unquestionably has a role. We've talked about this morning. But the private sector also needs to play its part. Now, in the United States, we have Title VII, we have a law, and I know there's laws in Europe and other member states of the OIC that prevent or restrict or criminalize discrimination on the basis of race, sex, national origin, gender, and religion. And these laws are incredibly important. But beyond that, the private sector can play a really important role because I submit there's a business case for promoting diversity and inclusivity. Right? There's a business case. Why is that? Well, if you look at consultants like McKinsey, they've crunched the numbers, and they found that an inclusive, diverse work environment, it retains employees because you feel comfortable, so you're not going to leave, right? It spurs innovation, right? It, frankly, it opens up access to new markets, right? So there's a business case to me. Now, this last point is incredibly important. If you look at Pew, Pew's looked at the numbers. The global Muslim population is going to be, by 2050, a third of the global population, right? So they're growing like something 35%. Muslim communities around the world are overwhelmingly young. They're increasingly middle class, right? And they're growing. Now, according to Thomson Reuters, the global Islamic economy, that means goods and services that are specifically targeted to Muslims, the global Islamic economy is growing across sectors, right? So the business case is clear. The business case for greater inclusion, diversity, right? It's clear, and frankly, the business sector, the private sector has its role to play. It needs to step up in promoting and fighting against anti-Muslim bigotry. Now, one sector that I think has a particularly important role to play is the entertainment sector. Stories matter. Stories matter. Not only do stories reflect a society's norms, over time, they can change them, for better or for worse. And some of us are old enough in the United States to remember The Cosby Show and the important impact it made on how Americans of all stripes view African Americans. And because of The Cosby Show, it opened up new avenues. So you have new representations of African Americans who are successful and diverse. Now look, Hollywood and other entertainment hubs have done a good job. They've made some progress in how Muslims are depicted, but there's a lot of work to be done. A lot of work. In fact, one of my areas of focus as special representative has been building ties between Hollywood and media companies in the Arab world and South and Southeast Asia. You see, Muslims, we have stories. That's part of our tradition. We don't need any help. We have stories. But sometimes we need help telling them. And that's why it's incredibly important for the private sector, including the entertainment sector, to help. Now, and I'm very happy that Zarka Nawaz and Dean Abdullah and some of my other friends, Alex Cronum, are going to have this next panel on the importance of narratives, because it's incredibly important. See, a lot of people, if you look at what the root causes are of anti-Muslim bigotry, oftentimes there's no grand unified theory, there's no silver bullet. But one problem is that oftentimes the people that have the worst views about Muslims don't know any Muslims. Right? They don't know. Pew has done the numbers. If you know a Muslim, then you're overwhelmingly likely to have positive views about Muslims as a group. And if you don't know any Muslims, well, guess what? Right? So we have to get to know each other. Now, as special representative of Muslim communities, I've had the opportunity to meet heads of state, senior government ministers, civil society leaders, including many of you in this room, religious leaders. But the most important thing I do, which has been a profound honor, is to meet young people. And I've met young people in conservative madrasas and elite secular institutions. And I hear a common theme over and over again: frustration. People feel that their religion has been hijacked. People feel that their countries are misrepresented, and there's frustration. And they ask, what can we do? Because what you see on the news is not who we are. And I tell them a story that I've heard. And then, I've repeated the story, over and over again. And it's a story I heard when I was a young boy. It involved a lion and a hunter. And the hunter was brave. The hunter was noble. And the lion was evil, conniving. And I heard this story over and over again. Well, after a while, as a young boy, you start to question. You ask, wait a second, what made this lion so bad? Why is he so evil? I don't understand it. And I was told, well, look, until the lion learns to speak and tell his or her own story, you're only going to hear the story of the hunters, right? So you need to tell your stories, and you live in a time where, because you have a cell phone, you can tell your story in a way that no one else can. But you need to tell your story. But more importantly than telling your story to yourselves, you have to tell stories to people who don't know you, because people who don't know you, you may be defined by others, who have bigoted, hateful intents. So don't let them shape the narrative. Tell your own stories. Stories matter. Now, so the question is, do we want to fight anti-Muslim bigotry? Do we want to fight anti-Semitism? Yeah. But I don't just want to fight. I want to win. And everybody in this room wants to win. And if we want to win and not just fight, we have to leverage coalitions. We have to hold governments accountable. We have to work with the private sector, and we have to tell our stories. I have to say, this is a special representative to Muslim communities. This job, this is my profession. This is what I've done for the last 2.5 years. But as a Muslim American, as a father, this is very deeply personal to me. And you like to think about your country as a proud American. I'm very proud of this country. And I know we have, member states from the OIC and from the EU, and I'm sure everyone's proud of their country. And I'm proud of my country. And you hope for the best, and you expect the best. But sometimes you see something that you don't expect. And a few weeks ago, I was taking my daughter to Islamic school, weekend school, on Sunday school. And I was dropping her off, and I saw graffiti. And I saw graffiti that I didn't expect to see. This is what I saw. Some neighbors in the local community had taken some talk, and just on the driveway had expressed messages of hope. United we stand. We love you. You're welcome here. And to me, that is the true message of America. So the question, ladies and gentlemen, is how do we make that a reality? Right? Look, the entire day we've been talking about the challenge. We know what we're up against. This is what we're for. So how do we make that a reality? How do we get expressions like that to be the norm? Right? Well, we need your help. Government, civil society, private sector, we all have to work together. So let me just end by saying 2 words. Thank you. This is the last speech I'm going to give as Special Representative of the Muslim community. The Obama administration is ending. On Friday, I'll turn in my badge, and I'll walk out the door like several of my colleagues. But I'm committed to this. This is not just professional. This is personal for me. I know this is personal for you. So in the weeks, in the months, and the years ahead, I hope I can count on all of you, leaders in the OIC, in the EU, certainly in my government, we can work together. So thank you so much. Thank you for this tremendous opportunity. I want to thank everybody that's responsible for this, the government of Canada, our colleagues at USUN, the OIC, and of course our dear friends in the EU. Thank you so much for this tremendous opportunity. We've got a long way to go, but we'll get there, God willing. Thank you so much.